Welcome to another reaction video. Today we're going to be interacting with a discussion between Andrew Klavan and Michael Knowles on free speech. So here we go.
To ask the Thomas Sowell question, who decides? I mean, if you look at the people who have power in America today, can you name one of them who has the power to censor?
Yeah, who decides? Who guards the guardians? Yeah, that's a great question, which means that you cannot have a good society and the good fruit of a good society without good men. You must have good men, and you can't have good men without the grace of God. The grace of God is found in the gospel. I'll return to this.
I think the practical or the hypothetical objection that people very often make is if we permit there to be limitations on free speech, why they might threaten our free speech. And my answer is, we've already permitted that, and it's already happening, and we're already the victims of that. They can kick the duly elected president off Twitter. They can do anything.
No, you're absolutely right. But the question that's still avoiding the question.
Well, no, but then I'll take.
No, it's not avoiding the question because a lot of these arguments are slippery slope arguments. If Christians or conservatives say, no, we want to put any restraint on speech at all, well, what happens when they do that to us? Well, his point, Michael Knowles' point, is that they're already doing that to us. But, as I'm going to point out, the answer lies farther upstream.
So, yes, I agree. Right now we're in this terrible position where the left is controlling our speech and controlling our minds and controlling our country.
Yeah.
And I want to fight back against that. So I can either fight back against that by saying, hey guys, stop it. We shouldn't have any limitations on speech. Or I can fight back against that by reasserting the traditional American limitations, the traditional American standards, and wielding political power to actually force them to stop using their political power against me.
But you can't have the traditional American standard without the traditional American foundation for that standard. You can't say, let's go back to the traditional American house, because you have to have the foundation that traditional house was built on. In Psalm 11, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The righteous can't do anything when the foundations aren't there. We have to return to that.
My answer to it as well is, there is the left right now, which is saying we're going to censor you and we're going to have hate speech laws and whatever. Then I think there is the call it the libertarian answer, although this would have been a foreign idea to people like Locke or Milton, but call it the classical liberal libertarian answer of no limits at all. And then I think there is the very far sort of Catholic integralist answer, which is, how do we determine the limits? Submit to pontifex. There you go. Now we've determined the limits. But I'm actually offering a different suggestion, which is a very naughty word that you're not allowed to say. Talk about censored words. Prudence.
Prudence where? Prudence located in whose heart? Prudence in the population generally? How are you going to do that without a massive religious revival?
I think prudence is not only a virtue, I think it's the conservative virtue. And it's something that Edmund Burke talks about at great length. How do we decide what the necessary and inevitable limits are? Because also part of my argument is not we don't have limits, but we should. Part of my argument is we always will have limits. The question just is, what are those limits?
Yeah, he's very good here. Not whether, but which. It's not whether there will be restraint on speech, but which sort of restraint it will be. And will it be restraint imposed, or will from without, or restraint that arises from within? Will it be restraint of righteous speech, or will it be restraint of wicked speech? Where's the restraint coming from, and what is the standard that measures what is to be restrained? That's always the question.
So my prudential argument is, why don't we just look to the past? Why don't we look to what our forebears thought was reasonable?
Yeah, we do need to look to the past and see what has worked in the past. But when we look to the past, we have to look at everything about it. We can't just look at the fruit. We can't say, in the past, we used to have apples. Because I would reply, yes, also in the past, we used to have an orchard. You can't just look to the past and gin up the apples. You have to go to the past and get the orchard and the apple. You have to have everything. It's a package.
Why don't we look to what has worked and led to flourishing in America? I don't think anybody believes that today's speech regime is the best we've ever had in America. Because, by the way, some people say we have way more free speech than we used to. Some people say we have way less free speech than we used to. It's kind of a little bit of both. I think we just have different standards. And so I can say any of those George Carlin words on TV, and I'd be applauded for it. But I can't say that a man is a man. And I could actually face many repercussions from the society. Soon enough, I might face legal repercussions for it.
Yeah, not whether but which. It's not whether there's discipline for speech, but which discipline it is and who disciplines.
Well, first of all, going back, one of the reasons we can't go back to the past is because we don't live there.
Yeah.
And one of the things you had in the past, I mean, when John Adams said our Constitution is for religious people, the reason he said that is because you have to oppress people if they will not control themselves.
He said, John Adams said, our Constitution presupposes a moral and a religious people. It is wholly unfit for any other. So basically, our Constitution, if you have a nation of people who are enslaved to their lusts, enslaved to their passions, enslaved to money, enslaved to all kinds of sin, the Constitution is a piece of paper that cannot keep them free. It's not going to happen.
If they are not responsible to a moral order, you have to oppress them, right? That's how free regimes fall, because chaos ensues, and as Plato said, and then you need the strong man.
Yeah.
So, but when people have stopped believing, when people have stopped holding themselves to a moral order, then I don't understand how you impose the ideas of the past without oppressing them.
Well, he's just said that oppression is inevitable. If the people will not govern themselves, they will be governed from outside, which is what's happening now. That's why the left is able to govern us, is because we're enslaved to our passions, and those passions are being used on us, against us, taking away our freedom. So basically, it's either freedom and Christ who sets us free, or we stay slave to our lusts, and we will be political slaves as well.
I think we're suffering from too much censorship even before this.
Yeah.
And the most important way I think we've allowed them to censor us is by taking religion out of the public square and God out of the schools.
Our problem is not that we took God out of the schools. Our problem is that we didn't take the kids out of the public schools.
So there's an area where the censorship, to me, paved the way for everything else. Yeah. So if our answer had been, no, wait a minute. This is one of the key aspects of human life. We should be able to teach it and put forward.
Yes, but I don't think taking religion out of the schools was, I guess this is kind of my central view of the whole thing, is I don't think it's just along this scale of free speech to censorship. I think when they took religion out of the schools, you had some free speech for Christians to pray, and you had some censorship. You were not permitted to espouse atheism in the schools or frankly anywhere else. When the Supreme Court decided to invent the constitutional prohibition on prayer, you just switched the standard. Now you were perfectly free to espouse atheism. Now it's effectively mandatory, but you were not permitted to espouse Christianity.
Yeah, you just switched the standard. There will always be a standard. And so our question always ought to be, by what standard?
It was freer for some people. There was greater censorship for other people. And I think the religion point is very good, because I totally agree with your point on John Adams. One way, there is a little bit of a paradox here, because in order for people to be free, they need to be educated. That's what liberal education is, to make sense of your freedom and to tamp down all your base passions.
But in order to be educated, they have to want to be educated. In order to want to be educated, they have to be converted. They have to be born again.
But in order to educate people, you kind of have to coerce them.
Well, that's true.
Or preach the gospel.
There are some things that you can do in a school, and especially in a public school, that you can't do anywhere else. And when you bring children into things, everything becomes a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
But it strikes me sometimes that what you're trying to do is the left took 70 years to march through our institutions, and they took them over.
Yeah.
And they took over our cultural institutions. They melted people's minds. They taught people ignorance and all this. And what you're trying to do is, let's pass a law against that. In other words, you're trying to solve by the heavy hand of government what the left accomplished by the hard work of taking over the culture.
I think we need to do both. The left also accomplished it through the heavy hand of government, like when they banned prayer in the public schools.
Well,
right?
but they did that through argument, right? They did that through winning in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, some robed lawyers did it. Yeah, I don't know if the arguments were that good.
Fair enough. But
I just think, of course I agree. We need, and I do not in any way advocate ignoring the culture. I think very much we need to infiltrate these institutions and retake them, or demolish them in the case of those that have been so hollowed out. But, you know, Andrew Breitbart's slogan that politics is downstream of culture is true in as much as it's true. But like all slogans, it's also not true.
It is true that culture is upstream from politics, but it is also true that worship is upstream from culture. So it's worship, then culture, then politics. So you can't just go partway upstream and deal with the culture. You have to go all the way up. We need a liturgical, musical, doctrinal reformation. Worship is what drives culture, and then culture is what drives politics. And you basically, if this problem is trying to figure out how to have salvation without a savior, how to have freedom without a liberator. But you can't have freedom without a liberator.